heard is a philosophy and an explanation of the scope for design in social innovation. We've heard about some very interesting experiments that have been happening on the ground. And we've also heard Ali talk about the practical and very hard requirements and goals that local authorities are faced with today. I'd like to start the questions by actually asking Alison a couple of questions. First of all, I have to admit, Alison, I've never seen a director of finance give such a beautiful presentation before. It was really beautiful. So thank you. And it was also nice to hear someone in your position talk about residents' journeys. So, you know, we have perhaps I have a bit of a preconception about what someone in your position would assume about their residents. So I'm seeing here already some really good connections and design language coming in your presentation, which was very lovely. And also to hear Leonardo da Vinci quoted in a councillor's presentation is fantastic. The trick is doing something else. So I have got a couple of challenges for you. The first one is, on the chart that you showed about your initiatives, and you continue to talk about it after, you talked about a right first time approach. Now, although I can really appreciate how that fits into your presentation, it does feel to me that's very conflictual with what Ezio was talking about. We have to experiment, and experimentation means we have to fail. And actually, even Leonardo himself does say something, quite similar. He's not talking there about a right first-time approach. So can you tell us a little bit about how you, well, perhaps I can address that to all three of you, just to start with.
I think you've really hit the nail on the head there, Claire. Really, and it's true. And I think, as a public servant, you have this dilemma. And professionally, I think we've always been in a space where we think we have to get it right. And it's been our professional judgment about, that's our, I'm an accountant, I'm a social worker, I'm a planner, I've trained all my life for this, and I know what's best. And where we've been in a journey in local government, and especially in Camden, is trying to turn that on its head and say, what we want to do is get it right for our customer, whether that's the citizen or the business. And that's where we mean about the customer journey, that their experience is a good one, even when we're saying no, which is a challenge, because sometimes in regulation you have to say no. And what we find really hard, and especially in Camden, I'd say in particular as a local authority, because we're so ambitious and quite proud, we do find it hard to experiment. And that's one of the reasons I think we're in this room, is us taking a bit of a risk of knowing that that's what we need to do, but we don't quite know how we're going to prototype. We don't quite know how we are able to make those mistakes if, as Wado said, we are in the glare of the press too. Okay, it's probably not the New York Times, but it is the Camden New Journal is our equivalent in Camden. And it's one of the few local newspapers in the country, actually, that devotes pages to what's happening in the local authority. And we have a bit of just to give a bit of context, a bit of competition, unofficial competition, going on between our different directorates of who's on the front page this week, so that, oh, thank God, it's not me, So how you do that prototyping and innovation and take those risks when, as a Deputy Director of Finance, I'm saying, no, it's got to add up and that's what the law tells me to do, as well as improving that customer experience and business experience, because before we've been quite bureaucratic organisation. That's our dilemma. So you've hit it on the head, and I certainly haven't got the answer.
Okay. Have you got anything?
But they will, won't they?
I think they might.
We talk about risk, or that's it. So I think it's there are three things that we learn. I think operating in this space. One is that we come from very different epistemological backgrounds, and we face problems. We deal with problems that are very different, with different language, with different theories, and we have to breach this. So it's not that one is wrong and one is right. Again, finding the common ground. The other is how we manage this risk aversion, that it's natural, it's not imposed. Sometimes it's imposed and it grows within, with fear, with political pressure, and so many other things. And we designers come with a very optimistic ideas, but sometimes we tend to be condescending. Sometimes we may offend instead of inspire because we are going against something. So we have to find this this way of speaking and dealing. So I think that's natural. I think it's not always like pointing fingers. I think there's also a self-critique that we have to make. We are designing a different space, I think.
Okay, Ezio, you have any comment there?
Well, I can add one point to what Edoardo said. First of all, I think that if we are in a transition, nothing is really simple. And the problem, in my view, is not only on this point that correctly, in my view, Claire focalized, but in all the scheme with the three big balls. Because I understand, I try to understand your condition, and I know that those are what people expect you to do. But at the same time, all the three, not only this one right first time, are very on the effectiveness, on making things a little bit better, where we know at the same time that the overall system has to change. That means the overall mentality has to change. So how can we do? Well, of course, I don't have the answer, but I think that when we talk, and it's not only Edoardo, me, or somebody, I travel a lot, and every people that are trying to make this kind of discussion arrive to the same conclusion. And the conclusion is we need some special spaces where you do not pretend to change the overall system, because you're totally right. If you do a law, a norm for everybody, that one has to be right. You cannot risk. But if you want to take some risk, you have to create a special place that is at the same time enough near to you so you feel it as a part of the institution, but at the same time it's a place where there is the right to fail. And the right to fail is impossible because it's possible in that place, because everybody knows that it's a place where it's possible to fail. And we know, also Leonardo da Vinci said, so he knew already that if you want to make something new, you have to fail, but you have to learn from the failure. But to learn from the failure, it means that you have the possibility to tell it. So all the condition as a condition in which you can be proud of your failure because you have to discuss about that. Where in the normal political issue, if you fail, you put under the carpet because nobody has to see it. And so you cannot learn anything. So I think that the big shift is we have to have in the transition a double level. The level in which we maintain the plane flying, in which you have to be very attentive and in some way inertial, and at the same time you have to do something to change the engine. And this has to be done in a relatively separate. And all the issue to make it work, because maybe Edoardo can go on more on this topic because it's one of his research, is how much is internal and how much is external. Because if it is too much external to your organization, you and your colleague will say, okay, this is your job, very good, do it. If it is too much internal, everything and every idea is in some way digested by the day-by-day institution, and so nothing new happens. So to find a way, and so maybe this could be a discussion afterward, there are several different experiments on how to make these experiment places, because in different places they have different names, they are promoted by different groups. So we will see in a while. This is one of the activities that we try to do, and I hope that what you will do here will be one of those, to understand how this need of experiment can find a solution, not a solution, but a tool in these places, and how these places can find the right equilibrium in between being inside and being outside.
So what we need is a kind of a whole set of new Liz's all around in every local council. I like that Liz idea.
But what the problem is, I've worked with crime, is that the councils, including your own, privatise the information. So I really applaud you. What you just did was amazing. But more of the councils have to do the same, and we have to share.
A question perhaps for the panel is, does this thinking lead to other kinds of financial models of working? And I wonder if I could have some reflections on that. How has it produced new ways of financing, new economies of design?
I would say we're in very early stages of some new models. So one of the models that was on there that Camden has only started to explore, but we haven't dipped our toe in yet, would be around social impact bonds. So how you do raise money that's not from a taxpayer but from investors to fund a social problem or tackling of a social issue, and often it's connected with a payment by results contract. So if the deliverer does, and for instance there's one running in Peterborough that many people will know around offenders, so if those offenders don't re-offend, then the St Giles, the trust that are running that programme, they get money from the Ministry of Justice on those results, and then they should be able to pay a small return, or a big return, depending on what the financial model is, back to those investors. And that's one of the new kind of models that are emerging. So when we hear about Big Society Capital or the Big Society Bank, that's where that thinking is beginning to go. But we're in very early stages of that in the UK, and I'd be quite interested to know whether, you know, from a global perspective, I suppose, whether the other design thinking ideas have led themselves to different kinds of funding models.
Could I just add to the question here a little bit? This is a little bit provocative, and you may not be in a position to draw this number out of your head on the spot.
Yeah.
But I'm very curious to know, seeing as you have done a lot of work with Central St Martin's and possibly other institutions, I would like to know how many designers have you, as a result of that, have you employed in the council, and would you consider raising that number as a result of what you've done?
I'm thinking of some of the people in the council. We have not employed any designers in the social innovation space. Not one, I think is fair to say. We will have people who have some design background that are actually working in some of our, and I'm guessing here, but in our transport engineer, you know, that side of things. But we have not employed one designer, I don't think, and if anyone thinks differently in the room, shout, but I don't think we have.
That's a challenge, okay, thank you. Thank you for your honesty.
That's all right.
Well, quick answer. I personally never worked with financial mechanisms or dealing with taxation, but as a principle, we've been involved in rethinking the use of resources. And maybe the reuse of resources, if you're talking about underutilized resources or assets, or rethinking how operations can be delivered, I think there will be an impact or financial impact. So that's my answer to your question here.
Ezio?
I always say, as my friend has said, I try to be a designer, so it's not a so-called expert designer. So it's not my special expertise. I would say that other kind of people that are in the finance have to be designers, because when you have this kind of problem, you really have to invent something new. And I know here in UK there are Nesta, Young Foundation groups, alternative, the Foundation of Alternative Economy, what's the name? They have done a lot of studies. They talk about social economy and more complex models. And to invent them, you have to invent them and apply them. So it means to be designer. But as designer, we can participate. So I will not say now, because I don't know exactly, but I imagine that as design component, we can bring a strong contribution to the answer to the question, saying what can be done to use at best existing resources. This is something we can do, because in the new model of the social economy, the economies can be done by different resources, by different actors. So somebody that participates because he or she like it, because it's part of a different vision of the life, because they find that it's very good for your life to do something that maybe before you was not doing. This is something which we as a designer could dare to think that we can have tools to create conditions in which people could be more happy to participate to maintaining the neighborhoods because it's part of their life and they recognize in it something the same that people could be happy to clean the house. People could be happy to have a certain kind of relationship with the neighborhoods. So on this part of the component of what does it mean to bring something that has also an economical value, I think that we can contribute in bringing some motivation and some cultural value that brings people to behave in a way that at the end of the day create also a different economical model.
I think you touched on something that's really interesting, that on this table we have three very different cultural contexts which actually probably has a big effect on the ability to engage with the design community. So just in brief, Italy, in Italy the word design is like a kind of a national sport in Italy, so everyone loves design. In America, clearly we have much more easier engagement with the term design. In the UK, design, I think, is still something of a swear word. And, I can see Private Eye or even the New Camden Journal putting a headline on their paper saying, Camden Council employs a designer, and that would be an outrage. That would be something that would be, really, really challenging. I suppose my question is, I thought it was really interesting that you've been training civil servants in some of design, some of the techniques and the tools of design, and I just wanted to ask Eduardo if you could elaborate a little bit about what did the civil servants think when they found out in New York that they were going to be having design training? What was the response that you had from them?
I think it's there is a desire to learn. I think there's the problems are huge, and everything that you put in front, I think it's taken with interest. And if it's and the way we are, so we don't expect them to become designers, but they become eventually design managers, or can use some of the skills to rethink and reframe their problems, and not doing that. It's not like, as you said, there's the need for the designer, but they are also being able to deal with design as a culture that can be helpful to their daily job. So it's the beginning of integrating not only design but other. I think there's, for instance, something happening in Denver. There's something called Peak Academy, where the mayor decided to train every single civil servant in agile methodology, right? So, and they're doing one by one, right? So there's something happening. So it's recognized. People are recognizing a need for doing something, and what we're doing here is working on what we're doing. We're not working with the decision makers, but we're working with people who are staying in the administration, not people who are appointed. So the mayor terms, it's 4 years, 8 years, in our case 12 years, but there are people who remain. So I think we're trying to diffuse that culture on that level.
Okay, so definitely less.